With the American people fighting all these battles and more, what did the Speaker of the House and the Democratic leader do with yet another day of deliberations? The Democrats are blocking it all. It's like they expect applause for merely keeping a civil tone with the president's team. Never mind, they're still obstructing any action for our country.
After a week of stalled talks, because Republicans could not articulate a position on hardly anything, I believe we're making progress.
Top White House officials meeting with Democrats again today, trying to reach a deal on a coronavirus stimulus package. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Kasie Hunt joins me now. Kasie, it is great to see you. How are those negotiations going today?
Great to see you too, Allison. I would say that we haven't moved very much, quite frankly, from yesterday.
Okay.
We heard just a couple minutes ago from the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who had met over lunch with Mnuchin and Meadows, the White House negotiators. And McConnell made a little bit of news in that he was pressed, and I pushed him on this $600 benefit that Americans have been enjoying. This is something Republicans have criticized. They say that it's prompting some people not to go back to work. Democrats have been insisting that, no, people really need it. And Pelosi suggested yesterday that might be her red line, that she wants that to stay at $600 a week for people. And I pushed Mitch McConnell on whether he was willing to talk about that and whether he would still put a bill on the floor if the president said, okay, I'm supportive of that, would he move forward? And he said, you know what, this isn't going to be a kumbaya moment the way some of these other bills were, and in fact, that he would be willing to put something out there that even perhaps he had some problems with. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But then we heard a little bit from Mnuchin and Meadows as they walked out of that lunch and headed across the Capitol to meet with Democrats. And they seemed to say contradictory things about whether the president was going to pursue executive action and about just what kind of proposals they were willing to put forward. So I think there's still a lot of gray in terms of where the negotiations stand. But you heard Chuck Schumer there say, okay, we think we're going to move forward a little bit. I would say that that tone is still prevailing today, Allison.
Kasie, I know that $600 weekly unemployment bonus has been a huge sticking point. Are there other major issues or a couple of issues in particular that are also holding up these talks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the top two are, aside from unemployment, are state and local government funding. Democrats have been pushing really hard for a major package to help state and local governments recover from this or get through it. I mean, we're not even quite yet in the recovery phase. We're in the survival phase of this. And then also money for education and how that money can be used by school districts. Are there strings attached to it? You know, a lot of Republican governors in Arizona, for example, have put restrictions on some money for superintendents. If you don't reopen, you don't get a chunk of the money that the federal government helps provide. So there's some disagreement on how much money in both of those cases and also how it's going to be allowed to be used.
Kasie, I know Republicans were at odds with the White House on what to include in this package. They were at odds with each other at the beginning, describing their own bill as a mess. Are we seeing improvements there? Are the Republicans a little bit more in line?
It's really hard to tell, Allison, I got to tell you. I mean, I think they're basically just waiting on the president to say what he wants because, McConnell's been candid in laying out, the way that this has to happen. And he said the president's got to be willing to sign it and the Speaker of the House has to be willing to pass it on the floor of the House. And the sense seems to be that if they can get the president to sign off, they can get the win in the Senate. And McConnell seems to be willing to put aside the concerns of some members in his conference in order to pass it with perhaps even more Democrats than Republicans supporting it. We'll have to see. But, the politics of this are driving all of it. And, there are lives at stake. This is incredibly important for so many people. So we don't want to, pitch it like it's some sort of game. But if you're thinking about how these decisions are being made and why, it's because the president is so far down in the polls. They're thinking about the November election, trying to do something. Republicans are concerned about losing control of the Senate. There are vulnerable Republican senators who really want to get something done on this to fix this so that they have a chance at winning their reelection. And then there's also a conservative group of senators who are thinking about running for president in 2024 because they see the writing on the wall about President Trump. And they're some of the ones who are raising the most vocal concerns about debt and deficits. So you have all of that mix going on. And McConnell said that today, too. He said, look, we're that much closer to the November election, and that's affecting the way things are going.
How about the way McConnell's been handling all this? I know at the beginning, a lot of people were saying that he just wasn't really involved in the negotiations, and that was raising eyebrows. What's sort of the vibe on Capitol Hill about how he's handling these negotiations?
Well, Allison, I think the fundamental bottom line is that he and his Senate Republican conference don't necessarily have power in this situation. And, he can read his conference and understands, he's going to have to pull some votes from his conference. So he needs to tell the White House negotiators, okay, hey, here are the ways in which you have to adjust this to make sure that I can get the votes to get it through the Senate. And I'm sure he has some concerns about making sure that he doesn't go too far in terms of what he's willing to support. But the reality is, as we were just discussing, it's the president and Democrats who are going to have to come to an agreement here if this is actually going to be something that becomes law.
And for another day, Kasie, from what you say, it sounds like they are just not moving that much further forward. Thanks so much for catching us up today. We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate it.
It is what it is. President Trump saying the coronavirus is under control in the U.S., even though it's killed nearly 157,000 Americans.
Right now, I think it's under control. I'll tell you what.
How? 1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is. But that doesn't mean we aren't doing everything we can. It's under control as much as you can control it.
NBC News political reporter Monica Alba joins me now. Monica, that was some interview and quite a long one. What else did the president have to say specifically on the coronavirus?
It was a fascinating exchange, Allison. Agree with you there. I think that quote, "it is what it is going to very much haunt and follow the president in the coming months, especially before November. But he was also pressed in that interview with Jonathan Swan of Axios about what he can promise Americans when it comes to testing. We've seen these delays that are now coast to coast, no matter where you're looking. Somebody goes and takes a coronavirus test, and they may not know for somewhere from 6 to 10, sometimes more days, what the result of that is. So in this interview, he was asked, when can Americans expect fewer delays and an actual national testing strategy? And it was really significant and notable that the president couldn't provide an answer. He said, I don't want to tell you because you're going to criticize me then if I give you a time frame that I can't deliver in. And I think that really shows us where we are today. The White House has experimented with so many different messages on the virus. At first, the president downplayed it. Then he said it was under control. Then it was learn to live with it. Then it was flames and embers that we're putting out. And now we're back to this. It is what it is, which shows sort of an admission that they aren't able to completely control what they have seen, which is now widespread, according to Dr. Deborah Birx. But the president also couldn't offer many specifics about what he was going to do about it. It is what it is also about the death rate. Remember, months ago, the president has said he expected a much lower death rate, but that anything above 60 or 80,000 was going to be something that they felt was under control. We're now at more than 150,000 lives lost, with some projections that could be as many as 180,000 just in the next couple of weeks, Allison.
Monica, all this sort of hints at, the major disagreements that we've seen between top health officials, the president. What is the latest on the sort of infighting within the White House over coronavirus messaging, over what's going on in our country?
Just today, you had Dr. Fauci saying in an interview that if these cases aren't under control by the fall, we're going to have a very serious problem, because you have the combination of the flu now with potential coronavirus cases, and hospitalizations that are typical in any other year now will be compounded by the virus. So he's warning really that states need to get this under control in whatever way they can. But what's so difficult here is that there is no federal overarching mandate, let's say, when it comes to masks or when it comes to returning and opening schools. The president is very clear on his position, but the different states and localities are the ones deciding everything. But it's scattershot. These things don't align and don't present a national picture. And Dr. Fauci's biggest point is that if you can't get this under control in the next 6 weeks, we're going to have a huge, huge problem heading into the fall, heading into the winter. There is some optimism about a vaccine. He continues to say that hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a good idea of some of these trials that are in phase 4. But then comes the question, how do you produce and distribute a vaccine? That, he said, will take a lot longer. That definitely takes us into early 2021. But the other thing we were tracking is the president's relationship with Dr. Deborah Birx, who he attacked in a tweet yesterday that raised a lot of eyebrows. The president then has said, though, he respects her. He did not go further in terms of saying that he didn't like what she was saying in an interview over the weekend. But she's the one who continues to say this virus is completely extraordinarily widespread, which he doesn't want to echo, but he declined to go further in terms of saying bad things about her in a press conference last night, Allison.
Monica, you mentioned the fall. Let's talk about the election. President Trump planning to sue Nevada over its legislation on mail-in ballots. Here's what Nevada State Senator Nicole Cannizzaro said about that on CNN.
We have seen these types of lawsuits previously here in Nevada. We've been sued by right-wing groups before claiming these false allegations, of voter fraud. And those cases have been routinely dismissed because it quite simply does not exist. So if the president wants to sue us here in Nevada, we're ready to take that fight on again. And we're confident that we will win, and we will do everything we can to make sure that we're protecting that constitutional right to vote in a safe and secure manner this general election.
So, Monica, what's the White House saying about this potential lawsuit?
What really stands out here today, Allison, is that the president seems to have a different approach to mail-in ballots or absentee voting, depending on the state. Just a few hours ago, he said he supports people in Florida requesting mail-in ballots and voting in November that way. But you look at Nevada, where they want to send ballots to all registered voters, which is different than what the president claims is the problem here. The White House and some Republicans have said that there is widespread fraud when it comes to voting by mail, which is simply not true. There is limited evidence of certain cases, but they try to draw the distinction between voting by absentee, which is how the president votes, which is how Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany and other major top officials vote, because they aren't in their home states in order to do their ballot. So they're encouraging Americans to vote that way, which they claim they have no issues with. But what they don't like is secretaries of states mailing ballots to everyone who's registered, because they say that could end up going to people who don't want to vote or who are no longer alive. They point out all these issues. But when it comes to the pandemic, millions of Americans are going to want to vote this way because they may not necessarily want to show up at a ballot box in person in November. So as you have all these early voting states that really start almost next month, this is going to be a major battle. The president, again, saying he wants to sue Nevada for what they're doing. But in Florida, it's totally fine. Request a mail-in ballot and do it that way. That's just a complete incongruence that we've seen from the president here just in the last couple of days and hours, Allison.
All right, Monica Alba, thank you so much.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.